What happens when an HOA bully puts his hands on the wrong woman, only to realize her husband is a retired Navy SEAL who refuses to be silent? Janine Colson had walked this path 100 times before. Same cracked sidewalk, same neatly trimmed hedges, same golden Texas light stretching long shadows across the cul-de-sac. It was Plano, a suburb where the loudest drama usually came from a high school football game or a barking dog. Nothing about this late afternoon walk with her terrier, Scout, hinted that anything was about to change. But the second she turned the corner onto her street, she noticed them. Two figures standing stiff by her driveway, their posture sharp enough to slice the calm out of the air. She recognized them instantly. Harold Vance and Cynthia Rowe, both longtime board members of the neighborhood HOA. Janine felt her stomach dip. She hadn't even made it to her porch yet, and the looks on their faces told her this wasn't going to be friendly. "Mrs. Colson!" Harold called out, his voice clipped, carrying across the quiet street. "We need to talk about that banner on your lawn." Janine adjusted Scout's leash, wishing she could just walk past. "It's a fall banner, Harold." Pumpkins, leaves, nothing offensive. Cynthia stepped forward, her manicured nails wrapped tightly around a clipboard. "It's not about being offensive. It violates the association's seasonal decor rules. Section 12, paragraph 4. You should know that by now," Janine exhaled slowly, her patience already fraying. "I've lived here 10 years. People put up everything from inflatable turkeys to 10-foot Santas. You've never said a word, 'That's different,'" Harold snapped, eyes narrowing. "This one, yours, wasn't approved." For a moment, the three of them stood in the fading light, the weight of the exchange pressing heavy on Janine. She glanced at her door, just a few yards away, but the thought of brushing past them made her pulse tick faster. "Look," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not taking it down. It's staying right where it is." Harold's jaw clenched. "That's not how this works." He took a step closer, his shadow stretching across her driveway like a threat. Cynthia's eyes flickered, nervous but silent. She wasn't the type to step in when things got tense. Harold thrived on confrontation, and Janine could see the anger twitching in his face, waiting for a spark. Scout barked once, sharp and nervous, tugging against the leash. Janine adjusted her grip and tried to walk forward, her heart hammering harder than she wanted to admit. But Harold moved quickly, blocking her path with the kind of authority that had nothing to do with HOA bylaws. "You can't just walk away," he growled. "I'm going inside my house, Harold." "Move," and then it happened. Quick. Ugly. Harold shoved her shoulder just enough to knock her balance, just enough to make Scout bark louder, just enough to send fear racing through her chest. Janine staggered back, catching herself, her voice rising sharp and furious. "Don't touch me!" That shout carried. It carried across the lawn, past the hedges, and straight into the open window of the house where Anthony Colson sat, still on the phone with an old Navy SEAL teammate. On the other end of the line, his friend was halfway through a story when Anthony suddenly raised a hand. "Hold on. Something's wrong." He'd been married to Janine for over 2 decades. He knew the sound of her voice in every shade, calm, laughing, angry. But this wasn't anger. This was fear. Anthony pushed back his chair, stood, and in 3 long strides was at the door. He didn't slam it open. He didn't storm out. His body moved with the calm precision of a man who'd been trained for years to act without panic. But in his chest, his heart had already switched gears. He stepped into the golden light of the driveway, and for the first time, Harold's expression faltered. "Is there a problem here?" Anthony's voice was low, firm, the kind that didn't need volume to carry authority. Janine's hand shook slightly on the leash. "He shoved me." Anthony's eyes locked on Harold, scanning every detail in an instant. The clenched fists, the tight jaw, the misplaced confidence of a man who thought power came from titles and rules. "I'm only going to ask once," Anthony said, his tone steady as stone. "Step back." And just like that, the air shifted. Neighbors peeking through curtains felt it. Cynthia felt it, her grip on the clipboard tightening. Even Harold felt it, though his pride kept him rooted in place. But Anthony wasn't moving either, and this confrontation had only just begun. But the moment Anthony stepped outside, the neighborhood was about to see a side of him few had ever imagined. The silence that followed Anthony's words was heavy, broken only by Scout's quick barks and the faint buzz of a lawnmower 2 houses down. Harold stood square in front of Janine, his chest puffed, his jaw hard, trying to convince himself he wasn't intimidated. But the calm weight of Anthony's presence had already shifted the balance. "Don't twist this," Harold said, forcing a laugh that came out jagged. "Your wife got physical with me first. I was just defending myself." Janine's eyes widened. "That's a lie! You shoved me because I wouldn't take down a banner." Anthony's gaze never wavered. He spoke evenly, but each word was like stone dropping into water. "I heard her. I know exactly what happened. Now move out of the way." Cynthia, who had been holding her clipboard like a shield, finally found her voice. "Anthony, let's not escalate this. Harold was just enforcing HOA rules. That's his responsibility." "Responsibility doesn't give him the right to put his hands on my wife," Anthony replied. His voice didn't rise, but it carried across the yard like it belonged there. Harold's face flushed red. "This is exactly the problem. People like you think the rules don't apply. You think you can do whatever you want because what?" Janine cut him off, her voice trembling but strong. "Say it, Harold. Finish your sentence." Neighbors were beginning to gather now, drawn out by the rising voices. Porch lights flicked on, curtains twitched. A teenager across the street lifted a phone, recording in the shadow of a parked car. Harold's eyes darted, realizing the attention was no longer in his favor. He lowered his voice, but the venom in it remained. "This neighborhood has standards. Some of us actually care about maintaining them." Anthony took one step forward, closing the space between them until Harold had no choice but to step back. "Standards don't mean shoving a woman in her own driveway. Standards don't mean intimidation. You crossed a line." For the first time, Harold's bravado cracked. He glanced at Cynthia, expecting backup, but she looked uneasy, her lips pressed tight. She wasn't about to co-sign what everyone could see with their own eyes. "Harold," she said softly, almost pleading, "maybe we should just file a notice. Let's not." But Harold wasn't listening. Pride was a poison, and it had him by the throat. "If you put your hands on me, Colson, I'll sue you for assault." Anthony shook his head slowly. "I don't need to touch you. I just need you to leave my wife alone." He turned slightly toward Janine, his voice gentler. "Go inside, sweetheart. I'll handle this." But Janine stood her ground. Her shoulder still ached where Harold had shoved her, and the injustice burned hotter than her fear. "No, I'm not hiding in my house. Not after what he did." Anthony looked at her, and in that brief glance there was years of partnership, of knowing exactly when to step forward together. He didn't argue. Across the street, a neighbor muttered to another. "Did you see that?" He shoved her. I saw it clear as day. The murmur grew. Phones tilted upward. The moment was no longer private. It was a stage. Harold, realizing too late that the crowd wasn't on his side, tried to regain control. "Everyone's blowing this out of proportion. It was a misunderstanding." Anthony folded his arms, calm but firm. "Misunderstandings don't leave bruises. Misunderstandings don't make people afraid in their own driveway." Cynthia's hand trembled slightly against the clipboard. She glanced at the cameras and then back at Harold. "We should go," she whispered. "This isn't worth it." But Harold refused. He leaned in closer, his voice low, meant only for Anthony. "You think your military background makes you somebody? This isn't a war zone. You don't scare me." Anthony's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained level. "I don't want to scare you. I want you to understand one thing. Touch my wife again, and you'll regret it." There was no shouting, no wild gestures, just quiet, controlled force that carried more weight than Harold's entire tirade. The tension hung like static in the air, everyone waiting for Harold's next move. Even Scout had gone silent, ears perked, as if sensing the gravity. And then, with a final scowl, Harold turned on his heel. "This isn't over!" Cynthia hurried after him, her clipboard clutched to her chest, her heels clicking fast across the pavement. Anthony stood still, his arms crossed, watching them retreat. Janine exhaled for the first time in minutes, her knees weak, but her resolve burning stronger than ever. "Anthony," she whispered, her voice unsteady. The next morning, the Texas sun had barely climbed over the rooftops when Anthony Colson sat at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of black coffee. Janine moved quietly around him, her shoulder sore from the shove, her mind replaying every second of the night before. Neither of them had really slept. "I still can't believe he put his hands on me," Janine said, lowering herself into the chair across from him. Her voice was low, raw. "In front of everybody, like I was some kind of problem to shove out of the way." Anthony rubbed his jaw, silent at first. He'd been in firefights overseas, staring down enemies who wanted him gone, but hearing the tremor in his wife's voice rattled him more than gunfire ever had. "He won't touch you again," Anthony said finally. His tone was calm, not performative. He didn't need to raise his voice for her to believe it. Janine let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's the thing, though. He thinks he can get away with it because he's Harold Vance, head of the HOA. He probably woke up this morning telling himself I was overreacting." Anthony's phone buzzed on the table. A name lit up the screen. Wes Hanlon, one of his old Navy teammates. Anthony picked up. "You good, brother?" Wes's voice carried a mix of concern and grit. "I saw the video." Anthony's grip tightened on the phone. "Already?" "Already. Someone posted it on Facebook last night. Then it hit Twitter this morning. You're everywhere, man. People are furious. They're saying Harold shoved your wife because he thought he could get away with it." Janine looked up, startled. "It's already online?" Anthony put the phone on speaker. "What are people saying, Wes?" Wes didn't hold back. "Half the comments are demanding Harold resign. The other half are saying HOA boards abuse power all the time, and this just proves it. But it's not just that. People are pointing out you didn't lose control. You handled it like a pro. The cameras caught everything. How calm you were. How you didn't touch him until he got aggressive again. That matters." Anthony leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "This isn't the kind of attention we want." "But it's the kind you've got." Wes shot back. "You can either let them spin it, or you can own the narrative." Anthony ended the call, but kept the words in his head. Own the narrative. He'd spent years in the military where every decision was life or death, where control meant survival. And now, in a suburban neighborhood, that same discipline was suddenly under the spotlight. Janine reached across the table, her hand covering his. "We didn't ask for this, Anthony, but maybe it's bigger than us now." He nodded slowly. "It is." Just then, a knock rattled the front door. Anthony stood, every muscle taut, his military reflexes instantly alive. He opened the door to find Officer Kyle Brennan from the Plano Police Department standing on the porch, notepad in hand. "Morning, Mr. Colson." "Mrs. Colson, I'm here to take your statements about what happened last night." Janine's pulse quickened. "Someone actually called the police?" Anthony gestured for the officer to come in. "Neighbors did." "I'm glad they did." They sat in the living room, recounting every detail. Janine's voice wavered at points, but Anthony's was steady, clear, factual. Officer Brennan scribbled notes, occasionally glancing up. "Several witnesses confirmed your account," the officer said finally. "And the video helps. We're moving forward with an assault report on Mr. Vance." Janine blinked, relief and anxiety mixing in her chest. "So, this is official?" "Yes, ma'am," Brennan said. "We'll notify you when we need further statements." "And Mr. Colson, your restraint is noted. You could have escalated this." "You didn't," Anthony gave a small nod. "My job was to protect my wife, nothing more." The officer left, but the house didn't feel quiet. The air was thick with what-ifs. Janine sank into the couch. What if Harold twists this? What if the HOA tries to paint us as troublemakers? Anthony sat beside her, resting a steady hand on her knee. Then we fight back with truth, nothing more, nothing less. A silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, carrying the weight of what lay. Harold Vance sat at his kitchen counter that same morning, clutching a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. His phone vibrated non-stop, notifications buzzing from neighborhood group chats, texts, and even a voicemail from his brother-in-law. The video was everywhere, neighbors whispering about his shove, strangers online calling him a bully, people tagging the HOA's Facebook page demanding his resignation. Across the table, Cynthia Rowe scrolled on her tablet, her lips pressed tight. "It's not good, Harold," she muttered. "They've got you on camera shoving Janine." "You can't spin that." Harold slammed his palm on the table. "She provoked me. She disrespected me in front of everyone. And her husband—" He broke off, jaw tightening. "That man thinks he's better than everyone just because he was military. He's not going to run this neighborhood." Cynthia set the tablet down. "Harold, you don't get it. This isn't about rules anymore. This looks like harassment. We've had complaints before, and now people are connecting the dots. They're saying you've targeted the Colsons because they're different from the rest of the neighborhood." His face darkened. "That's ridiculous." "Maybe," she said carefully. "But perception matters more than facts now, and the perception is bad." While Harold seethed in his kitchen, Anthony was in the driveway hosing down the walkway, trying to clear his mind. He knew Harold well enough to understand that a man like him wouldn't let humiliation go quietly. Janine stepped outside, holding her phone. "Anthony, you should see this. They posted Harold's statement." Anthony shut off the hose and wiped his hands on a rag. "Let me guess. He's painting himself as the victim." Janine nodded, showing him the screen. Harold had written a long post in the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming Janine had become aggressive, that he had merely defended himself, and that Anthony had intimidated him with military tactics. Anthony scanned the post, his jaw tightening. He's trying to rewrite reality. Just then, a voice called from across the street. "Hey, Colson!" It was Ron Keller, one of the older neighbors, leaning against his mailbox. "Don't let that man push you around. We saw what happened. We've got your back." Janine managed a small smile, but Anthony's eyes stayed sharp. Support was good, but Harold still held power within the HOA, and power mixed with pride could be dangerous. That evening, the Colsons sat down for dinner when another knock came at the door. This time, it wasn't a police officer. It was Megan Ellis, a young mother from 2 houses down, holding her phone nervously. "I thought you should know," she said, glancing around before lowering her voice. "Harold's been going door to door. He's telling people Anthony threatened him. He's trying to rally votes to kick you out of the HOA entirely." Janine's fork clattered against her plate. "Kick us out? For what? Defending ourselves?" Megan shook her head. "I don't buy his story, and a lot of folks don't either, but some people are loyal to him. He's using fear to hold on." Anthony leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Thank you for telling us, Megan. We'll handle it." After she left, Janine turned to him. "He's not stopping, Anthony. He's escalating." Anthony looked out at the street, calm but calculating. "Then we prepare for what's next." The preparation came sooner than expected. 2 nights later, the Colsons pulled into their driveway after grabbing groceries. As Anthony unloaded bags, Harold appeared at the curb, his stance wide, his voice already raised. "You think you're a hero, Colson, parading around like you own this neighborhood." Anthony set the grocery bag down on the hood of the car. "I think I'm a man protecting his family." "You should have thought twice before putting your hands on my wife." Harold stepped closer, fists clenched. "You lay one finger on me, and I'll have you arrested. You're not in the Navy anymore. You don't get to call the shots." Janine, standing behind Anthony, pulled out her phone. "Good. Say that louder. Let's get this on record." Harold's face flickered with hesitation, but his pride shoved him forward. "You're done here. I'll see to it personally." Anthony's voice dropped, steady and sharp. "Walk away, Harold. Last chance." The street was quiet except for the rustle of leaves. Then, one by one, doors opened. Neighbors stepped out onto porches, phones raised again. A spotlight Harold couldn't escape. Cynthia, trailing behind him, tugged at his arm. "Harold, stop! They're recording. You're digging yourself deeper." But Harold yanked his arm away, shouting back at Anthony. Finally, Cynthia pulled him back, hissing, "Enough!" and dragged him toward their car. Janine lowered her phone, her hands trembling. Anthony picked up the groceries again, as if the confrontation had been just another task to manage. "Anthony," she whispered, her eyes wet. "How much longer can we live like this?" He looked at her, steady and certain, as long as it takes for the truth to win. But truth doesn't spread quietly, and by the next morning, the entire city would know their names. By dawn, the Colsons' street looked ordinary again, lawns watered, sprinklers ticking, kids waiting for the bus. But under the surface, lines had been drawn. Neighbors who once waved casually now eyed one another with suspicion. The shove, the video, the late-night shouting. It had all fractured the illusion of harmony. Inside the Colson home, Janine sat at the dining table scrolling through her phone. Her stomach tightened with every comment. Some neighbors had posted supportive messages. "We stand with the Colsons. No one deserves that treatment." But others repeated Harold's version, claiming Janine lunged first, or that Anthony intimidated Harold by stepping outside. Anthony poured coffee, setting a cup in front of her. "Don't read all of it." Half those people weren't even there. She looked up, eyes tired. But some were, and they're still siding with him. Why? Because admitting the truth means admitting they've turned a blind eye to Harold for years. Anthony said, "It's easier to pretend this is about a banner than about his behavior." The phone buzzed again. A message from Gloria Martinez, a neighbor from 2 streets over, popped up. "HOA is holding an emergency meeting tomorrow night. Be ready." Janine set the phone down hard. "He's not wasting time." Anthony nodded. "Neither are we." That evening, the Colsons took a walk with Scout. As they passed a row of houses, they noticed small clusters of neighbors chatting in hushed voices. Some offered quick waves, others turned away. At one corner, Anthony spotted Don and Marcia Klein, a retired couple who'd lived there since the neighborhood was built. "Anthony," Don called out, waving him over. "We saw the video." "You handled yourself well." Marcia stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But you should know, Harold's been talking. He's telling people you're dangerous, that your military background makes you volatile. He's scaring folks into thinking you'll snap." Anthony's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "I'm dangerous when I have to be. Protecting my wife isn't volatility. It's love." Marcia gave a small nod, her eyes kind. "We believe you. Not everyone does." Farther down the street, a different tone surfaced. Peter Lawson, a middle-aged man known for siding with Harold on most HOA disputes, called out with a mocking smile. "Hey, Colson! Teaching the neighborhood Navy combat drills now?" Anthony didn't respond, but Janine stopped, glaring back. "You saw what happened, Peter. You saw him shove me." Peter shrugged. "Looked like a tussle to me. People exaggerate when cameras roll." Janine's fists clenched, but Anthony gently touched her arm, steering her forward. "Not worth it," he murmured. Back home, Janine dropped onto the couch, frustration spilling over. "I can't believe they're buying his lies. After everything, after everyone saw it, some people still defend him." Anthony sat beside her, his voice steady. "People cling to what's comfortable. Harold's run this place for years. Admitting he's wrong would mean admitting they let him run unchecked. That's hard for some folks to swallow." The next night, the HOA meeting packed the community center like a courtroom drama. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder, reporters from a local station lingered near the back with cameras ready. The air hummed with anticipation. At the front, Harold sat with Cynthia and 2 other board members, his face rigid but his eyes darting nervously. Anthony and Janine entered quietly, but all eyes followed them. Whispers rippled. "That's her. The one he shoved. That's the Navy guy." They look calm. The chairperson, an older woman named Phyllis Grant, tapped the microphone. "We're here to discuss recent events involving a board member and a resident. I ask everyone to remain respectful." Respect didn't last long. Harold shot up before she could continue. "Let's get this straight. I was attacked, verbally and physically. I was defending myself and enforcing community rules." Boos erupted from several neighbors, while others clapped in support. Janine rose to her feet, her voice clear. "You shoved me in my own driveway because I didn't take down a banner. That's not defense. That's assault." Gasps rippled through the room. A few neighbors shouted, "We saw it!" Others muttered about rules and regulations. Anthony finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. "This isn't about a banner. This is about power. When someone thinks their position lets them put hands on others, that's abuse. That's harassment. And I won't let it stand. Not for my wife." The declaration sparked cheers from some, groans from others. Harold's face turned crimson. "This isn't over," he hissed, glaring at the Colsons. Anthony met his stare without flinching. You're right. It's not. But outside that meeting room, the story had already grown larger than their subdivision, and by morning, it would reach far beyond Plano. By sunrise the next morning, the Colsons' quiet street in Plano had become a point on the digital map of outrage. What began as shaky phone footage passed from neighbor to neighbor was now clipped, captioned, and reposted by accounts far beyond Texas. The video of Harold's shove, paired with Anthony's calm but firm presence, had exploded across social media. Janine scrolled through her phone at the kitchen counter, her coffee untouched. The video now carried headlines from blogs and local outlets. HOA president caught on camera shoving resident's wife. Retired Navy SEAL confronts HOA bully. Each share brought more comments, some supportive, others twisted, some cruel. Anthony leaned against the counter, arms folded. Let me guess. People already have opinions about us. Janine looked up, shaking her head in disbelief. Anthony, it's gone national. Look, this one's from a station in Dallas. They're calling it an example of HOA abuse of power. And here, this reporter says it's raising questions about race in suburban neighborhoods. Anthony's brow furrowed, but his voice stayed calm. That's what happens when people see injustice. They connect it to bigger patterns. The phone rang before Janine could answer. It was their daughter, Shauna Colson, calling from Austin, where she worked as a teacher. Janine put it on speaker. Mom, Dad, are you okay? Shauna's voice was tight with worry. I saw the video on Twitter before I even saw it from you. Half my co-workers are talking about it. We're fine, Anthony said. We're holding steady, Shauna hesitated. They're calling Harold's actions racist, Dad. They're saying he targeted Mom because she's black. Do you think that's why this happened? The question hung in the air, heavy and raw. Janine's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her mug. I don't know, sweetheart, but I know he wouldn't have shoved me if I looked like the women on his block he's never bothered before. Anthony nodded once, his eyes steady on Janine. We don't have to name it for people to see it. They'll draw their own conclusions. After the call, Anthony stepped outside to breathe, only to find a reporter already on the sidewalk. Microphone in hand, she introduced herself as Kelly Reeves from WFAA Dallas. Mr. Colson, she said quickly, can you comment on what happened 2 nights ago? The footage has people across the state asking questions about HOA accountability and racial bias. What's your response? Anthony kept his tone measured. My response is simple. My wife was assaulted in her own driveway over a banner. I did what any husband should do, protected her. The rest? That's for people to decide after they see the truth. The clip aired on the evening news, and that was when the Colsons realized there was no going back. Inside the HOA, panic set in. Harold sat in his office, staring at emails flooding in from residents and strangers alike. Words like resign, abuse, and disgrace lit up his inbox. Cynthia called, her voice sharp. Harold, you need to step down. This is destroying the board. No, Harold barked. If I quit, I'm admitting guilt. I won't give them that satisfaction. That man, Colson, he's manipulating this whole thing. Harold, Cynthia pressed. The video speaks for itself. You shoved her. Everyone saw it, but Harold was unmoved. Pride was his armor, and he refused to take it off, even as the cracks widened. Meanwhile, Anthony and Janine sat on their back porch, listening to the hum of cicadas, the air heavy but still. Anthony, Janine whispered, what if this gets uglier? What if people come after us online? What if someone shows up here? Anthony reached for her hand, his grip firm. Then we face it together. We didn't ask for this, but maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe this is bigger than just us. Their phones buzzed again, this time with messages of support from strangers across the country. Veterans saluting Anthony's restraint, women sharing stories of being bullied by HOA boards, families thanking them for shining a light on an abuse of power too many had endured silently. Janine exhaled, her shoulders easing just a fraction. Maybe we're not as alone as it feels. Anthony looked toward the dark street, where porch lights glowed like quiet watchtowers. He knew Harold wasn't done. He knew the HOA would fight to keep its grip. But he also knew the world was watching now, and that changed everything. But if going viral brought support, it also brought enemies, and the Colsons were about to learn just how far Harold would go to reclaim control. By the end of the week, the Colsons' quiet cul-de-sac looked less like a row of suburban homes and more like a magnet for headlights, cameras, and microphones. Vans from Dallas and even national outlets parked along the curb. Neighbors who once waved politely now peeked nervously from behind blinds, worried about being caught in the background of a news shot. Anthony stood on the porch early one morning, arms crossed, watching reporters cluster at the end of the driveway. Janine joined him with a steaming mug of tea. "They're not going away, are they?" she asked softly. "Not until the story runs its course," Anthony replied. "And Harold's making sure it doesn't." Harold Vance had doubled down. 2 days after the video went viral, he appeared on a local radio show, insisting he was the real victim. His voice dripped with indignation as he told the host, "I was trying to enforce community standards. I was physically threatened. This man has a background in combat. Do you think I felt safe?" Clips of the interview spread just as quickly as the video. Some listeners bought into his narrative, calling Anthony dangerous, unstable, even a ticking time bomb. At the Colsons' kitchen table, Shauna shook her head in disgust after hearing the clip. "He's flipping everything. He makes it sound like you were about to attack him." "Dad." Anthony stayed calm. "That's what people do when the truth isn't on their side. They rewrite it." Janine's voice cracked as she read a few comments aloud. "This Navy guy should be locked up. He's a threat to the neighborhood. Why don't they just move?" She set the phone down, her hands trembling. "Anthony, they don't even know us." "They don't need to," Anthony said. "They've already chosen a side." But while Harold's supporters spread his version, a larger wave pushed back. A Dallas paper ran an op-ed headlined, "HOAs were meant to protect communities. Too often they abuse them." A national morning show booked a segment with legal analysts breaking down the video frame by frame. One clip from a CNN interview showed attorney Lisa Sheridan analyzing Anthony's restraint. "You can see it here," she said, pointing to the screen. "Mr. Colson never escalates until Harold raises his hand again. That's critical. It shows control, not aggression." The contrast between Harold's narrative and the footage only deepened the divide. Neighbors who once avoided taking sides found themselves pushed to pick one. At the grocery store, Janine overheard 2 women in the produce aisle whispering loudly enough for her to catch. "That's her, the one who caused all this drama." Another woman chimed in, "Or the one who stood up to him. Depends on who you believe." That night, Anthony and Janine sat across from each other in the living room, the glow of the television reflecting off their faces. News anchors debated their lives as though they were characters in a show. "I didn't sign up to be a headline," Janine murmured. Anthony leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Neither did I. But maybe this isn't about signing up. Maybe it's about refusing to be silent when silence is easier." Just then, Anthony's phone buzzed. It was Wes again. "Brother, I've got to tell you something. Harold's reaching out to veterans groups, claiming you're disgracing the uniform by using intimidation." Anthony pinched the bridge of his nose. "Of course he is. You want me to rally some guys, put out statements of support?" Wes offered. Anthony thought for a moment. "Not yet. If we fight every lie, we'll drown in them. Let the truth speak louder." Janine glanced at him, weary but proud. "You always did know how to stand your ground without swinging your fists." Outside, another news van pulled up. The neighborhood's once quiet sidewalks were now a battlefield of perception, and Harold wasn't backing down, but neither was Anthony. But the real clash wasn't going to happen on the airwaves or online. It was headed straight for the HOA's next public meeting, and no one knew just how explosive it would get. The community center was overflowing before the meeting even started. Cars jammed the parking lot, forcing latecomers to park along the curb. A few news vans idled nearby, cameras waiting to roll. Inside, folding chairs scraped across the floor as neighbors claimed seats, their voices carrying a nervous energy. Anthony and Janine entered quietly, but the buzz shifted as soon as they walked in. Some nodded at them in support, others muttered under their breath. Phones tilted discreetly, already recording. At the front of the room sat the HOA board. Harold, stiff in a blazer, Cynthia beside him, and two other members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. A microphone rested on the long table, a pitcher of water sweating in the warm air. Phyllis Grant, the chairwoman, tapped the mic. This meeting is called to order. Tonight's agenda concerns recent events involving Mr. Vance and the Colson family. A low murmur spread. Anthony took Janine's hand, giving it a firm squeeze before letting go. Harold leaned into his mic before Phyllis could continue. His voice boomed, rehearsed, and bitter. Let's be clear. I was enforcing HOA guidelines when Mrs. Colson became aggressive. I acted in defense, nothing more. Jeers and shouts echoed from the crowd. We saw the video! Someone yelled. Janine stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her voice rang out, strong despite the tremor in her chest. You shoved me, Harold. In front of neighbors, in front of my own home. Don't call that defense. Call it what it was. Assault gasps filled the room. Reporters raised their cameras higher. Harold's jaw tightened. You're twisting this. And your husband? Your husband used intimidation tactics. He loomed over me, restrained me. That's aggression. Anthony rose slowly, not raising his voice but commanding the room nonetheless. I restrained you because you raised your hand again. If I hadn't, what would you have done? Do you think pushing my wife once was enough? Silence followed. The question landed like a stone in water, rippling through the crowd. From the back, Ron Keller's voice rang out. We all saw it, Harold. You shoved her because you thought you could. Then you tried to play the victim. Others chimed in. We're tired of this abuse. You've bullied this neighborhood for years. Harold's face reddened, sweat glistening at his temples. This is slander, he barked. I've given my time, my energy, your control, Janine cut in, her voice steady. You've used this board to intimidate, not to serve. People are scared to speak up because you punish them with fines, warnings, and humiliation. All eyes turned to the neighbors. Whispers turned into confessions. A mother of 3 spoke up. He fined me for letting my kids' bikes sit on the lawn overnight. Twice an older man added, he threatened to tow my truck because it had a dent. Said it lowered property values. The room buzzed louder with each story. Anthony stepped closer to the board's table. This isn't about a banner. It's about leadership that mistakes power for authority. Leadership that forgets rules are supposed to serve people, not punish them. Cynthia shifted uncomfortably, adjusting her glasses. Maybe we should let the investigation run its course. But Harold slammed his fist on the table. No, I won't be railroaded out of my position by lies and theatrics. Anthony met his glare. You don't have to be railroaded out, Harold. You can step down. Right here. Right now. The crowd erupted, some clapping, others shouting. The noise was so loud Phyllis banged her gavel until the room quieted. This board will vote, she announced. Effective immediately, Harold Vance is suspended pending investigation. The words hit Harold like a slap. He shot to his feet, pointing a finger at Anthony. You think you've won? You haven't seen the last of me? Janine stood tall beside her husband. No, Harold. The neighborhood has finally seen the real you. As Harold stormed out, cameras followed, neighbors buzzing with shock and relief. The board members looked shaken but resigned, scribbling notes as if the paperwork might shield them from the fallout. Anthony wrapped an arm lightly around Janine's shoulders as they walked out together. The flash of cameras, the hum of voices, the weight of a turning tide, all of it pressed against them, but they didn't falter. But suspending Harold was only the first crack. The deeper fight for accountability was just beginning. The suspension of Harold Vance was meant to calm things down, but instead it poured gasoline on a fire already burning hot. By the following week, the Colsons' neighborhood had become a symbol, splashed across talk shows and news sites. Commentators debated HOA overreach, racial bias, and the dangers of unchecked authority. For Anthony and Janine, life was no longer just about mowing the lawn or walking scout. It was about answering calls from reporters, lawyers, and neighbors who suddenly found the courage to speak up. At their kitchen table, stacks of letters began to pile up. Some were thank you notes from strangers, veterans who wrote, "You showed us what restraint looks like," or women who said, "I know what it feels like to be shoved and silenced." Others carried uglier messages, scribbled threats telling them to leave Plano, calling them names that made Janine's hands shake as she folded the papers back up. Anthony sat with her one evening, carefully sorting the stack. "We'll keep the good, toss the bad," he said simply. Janine looked at him, eyes weary. "It's not that easy, Anthony." The words still stick. He reached over, covering her hand with his. "Words are wind. They only have weight if we let them." Meanwhile, Harold was not staying quiet. Though suspended, he was rallying his allies behind closed doors. In hushed backyard conversations and whispered phone calls, he painted himself as a victim of a smear campaign. He told loyal neighbors that the Colsons were outsiders, agitators who wanted to destroy their way of life. One evening, Megan Ellis knocked again on the Colsons' door, her face tense. "I thought you should know," she said, her voice low. "Harold's trying to get a petition together. He wants the board reinstated under new rules. He's promising people lower HOA dues if they back him." Anthony exhaled slowly. "So he's buying loyalty now." Janine shook her head. "This man won't stop until he's dragged out." The next HOA meeting drew an even larger crowd than before. Local reporters packed the room, and even a state representative had sent a staffer to observe. The board sat stiffly at the front, clearly rattled by the attention. Phyllis Grant cleared her throat nervously, calling the meeting to order. Neighbors lined up to speak. One after another, voices rose, not in whispers but in testimony. A single mom described being fined for leaving her trash can visible for an hour. An elderly veteran recounted being threatened with legal action for painting his shed without approval. Each story piled on like bricks, building a wall against Harold's legacy. Janine took her turn, standing tall despite her nerves. "This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about years of intimidation. People have lived here in fear of letters, fines, humiliation. That's not community. That's control." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling. Anthony followed, his presence quiet but commanding. "I've served my country. I've seen what happens when people abuse power. It's not always obvious. It can be small, creeping into daily life until people forget what respect looks like. That's what happened here. But respect is not optional. It's the foundation of any community." His words hung heavy in the air. Even those who had doubted him found themselves nodding, caught in the calm conviction of a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. The board finally voted. Harold's suspension became permanent, his seat vacated. Cynthia resigned moments later, unable to weather the storm. The neighborhood let out a collective breath, the tension breaking like a dam. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones shoved forward. Janine gripped Anthony's arm, overwhelmed, but he kept walking, steady, guiding her through the crowd. Back home, the two of them sat in the living room, Scout curled at their feet. The house was quiet at last, but the weight of what had happened lingered. "Do you think it's really over?" Janine asked softly. Anthony leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "For Harold? Maybe. For the neighborhood? Number. This was never just about one man. It's about how people let power go unchecked. That doesn't end with a vote. It ends when people refuse to look away." Janine smiled faintly, her exhaustion mixing with pride. "Then maybe we've started something worth finishing." Outside, the cul-de-sac was quiet. Porch lights glowed. Children's bikes lay in driveways. Sprinklers ticked softly against the grass. For the first time in weeks, it felt almost normal. Almost. But even as relief settled in, Anthony knew their fight carried a lesson that reached far beyond Plano, and it was one he was determined to share. The storm had finally broken, but the air was still heavy with what it had carried. Weeks had passed since Harold's removal, yet the echoes of his shove, his words, and his downfall lingered in every corner of the neighborhood. Life was returning to normal. Garbage trucks rolled through, kids shouted on bikes, lawns were mowed. But beneath it all, something had shifted. Anthony sat on the back porch one evening, the cicadas buzzing in the humid Texas air. Scout lay at his feet, and Janine settled into the chair beside him with a glass of iced tea. For the first time in a long while, they could sit together without bracing for the next confrontation. "You know," Janine said, her voice soft but steady, "I keep thinking about how it all started." A banner. Just a silly little banner. Anthony gave a small smile. It was never really about the banner. "No," she agreed. "It was about power, about someone thinking they could shove me, silence me, and get away with it. And if we hadn't fought back—" Her words trailed off, the thought too heavy to finish. Anthony reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "But we did fight back, and not with fists. With truth, with patience, with strength that doesn't need to prove itself." Janine leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I'm proud of us. Not just for standing up to Harold, but for showing the neighborhood, showing everyone, that you don't have to let intimidation win." A soft breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Anthony closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace settle in. But when he spoke again, his words carried the weight of a man who had lived through battlefields, both foreign and domestic. "I spent years in the Navy, learning discipline, strategy, and control. But nothing prepared me more than this, protecting my wife, my home, and our dignity. People think strength is about force. They're wrong. Strength is about restraint, about knowing when to hold the line and when to let the truth speak for itself." Janine lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "Do you think the neighborhood will really change?" Anthony thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Some will, others won't. But change isn't about everyone moving at once. It's about planting seeds, one at a time. Maybe someone here will remember this moment the next time they're bullied. Maybe someone watching online will think twice about staying silent. That's enough for me." The next week, the Colsons attended a community barbecue hosted by neighbors who had rallied behind them. Laughter and music filled the air, children ran through sprinklers, and for the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt united. Several residents approached Anthony and Janine to thank them. "You showed us we don't have to be afraid," one woman said, her voice breaking. "I wish I'd had the courage to speak up years ago." Anthony clasped her hand gently. Courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to step aside when someone shoves you. Later that night, as the stars stretched across the Texas sky, Anthony sat with Janine on their porch once more. The glow of the streetlights felt softer now, less like watchtowers and more like guardians of a neighborhood reclaiming itself. Janine sighed, a small smile playing at her lips. "We didn't ask for this, Anthony, but maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe we were supposed to be the ones to push back." Anthony's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Maybe. Or maybe it just proves one thing, that no matter how ordinary the day, how small the trigger, standing up matters." Every time he turned to her, his voice steady, deliberate. "Because if we let small injustices slide, they grow into bigger ones. And if we don't stand up for dignity at home, where will we stand for it?" Janine reached for his hand again, holding it tightly. Together, always together. And with that, the fight that had begun with a simple banner ended with something far greater. A lesson that spread from one driveway to countless living rooms across the country. A reminder that strength is not in intimidation, but in courage. Not in power, but in principle. Anthony and Janine hadn't set out to be a symbol, but sometimes the world chooses its examples, and they had chosen to meet that responsibility with grace. So if you take anything from their story, let it be this. Don't let fear keep you silent. Don't let intimidation make you small. Whether it's in your neighborhood, your workplace, or your own home, stand for dignity, for truth, for respect. Because when you do, others will find the strength to stand too. And if you believe stories like this deserve